The streets were quiet that night, but quiet didn't mean safe. Not in this part of town. Jamal Carter knew that better than anyone. He had lived here all his life, in the same worn-down neighborhood where cops weren't protectors, they were predators. He had seen what happened to people who crossed their path at the wrong time, in the wrong way, with the wrong skin. So, when the flashing red and blue lights appeared behind him, he already knew how this was going to go. He took a slow breath, gripping the steering wheel tight enough to turn his knuckles white. Stay calm. Don't reach for anything. Keep your hands where they can see them. The routine was burned into his mind, drilled into him since he was a kid, but no amount of preparation ever stopped the fear. A car door slammed behind him, heavy footsteps, then a sharp knock on his window. Jamal turned his head slowly, keeping his movements controlled. A white officer stood outside, one hand resting on his holster. His face was blank, unreadable. Jamal rolled the window down. "Evening, officer." His voice was steady, careful. "You know why I pulled you over?" the cop asked. Jamal shook his head. "No, sir." The officer tilted his head. Broken taillight. Jamal exhaled. He knew damn well his taillights were fine when he left the house, but this wasn't about a taillight. This was about him. "License and registration," the cop demanded. Jamal moved slowly, keeping one hand on the wheel as he reached for his glove compartment. The officer's fingers twitched near his gun. Jamal froze. "I'm just getting my registration," he said carefully. The cop didn't respond, just watched him with cold eyes. Jamal retrieved the paperwork and handed it over. The officer barely glanced at it. "Step out of the car." Jamal hesitated. "Why?" The officer's expression darkened. "Step out." Jamal clenched his jaw, his heartbeat thudding in his ears. He glanced in his rearview mirror, hoping someone, anyone, was watching. But the street was empty. He was alone. Slowly, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped outside. The air was thick with tension. The officer's hand never left his gun. "Turn around," he ordered. Jamal's stomach twisted. "Officer, turn around." Jamal did. The shove came fast, hard. He stumbled forward, barely catching himself before his face hit the hood of his car. "Spread your legs," the cop barked. Jamal swallowed his anger, his humiliation, and did as he was told. He felt rough hands patting him down, searching for something, anything, that could justify what was coming next. Then, "Got a little record, huh?" Jamal's blood ran cold. The cop had run his name. He had found something, a charge from years ago. Nothing major, just a stupid mistake. A fight in high school that led to a misdemeanor, something that should have been long behind him. But for a black man, nothing was ever really behind you. "Look at that," the cop said mockingly. "A troublemaker." Jamal gritted his teeth. "That was a long time ago." The cop chuckled. "They always say that." His hands tightened on Jamal's wrists, and then, click, handcuffs. Jamal stiffened. "What the hell?" "You fit the description of a suspect in a robbery nearby." Jamal's stomach dropped. "That's bullshit. I just got off work. Call my boss. Check the security cameras." The cop slammed him against the car. Jamal gasped, pain exploding through his chest. "Don't resist," the officer hissed in his ear. Jamal wasn't resisting, but none of that mattered. Because the badge wasn't just protection. Tonight, it was a weapon, and Jamal Carter was its next target. Jamal's face pressed against the cold metal of his car's hood, his breath coming in sharp, angry bursts. His heart pounded, not just from fear, but from rage. This wasn't about a taillight. This wasn't about a robbery. This was about control. He could feel the cop's breath near his ear, feel the weight of his knee pressing into his back. "See, I knew you were hiding something," the officer muttered, yanking the cuffs tighter. Jamal clenched his jaw, his hands balling into fists behind his back. "I didn't do anything." The cop ignored him. The next thing Jamal knew, he was being yanked away from the car. He stumbled, his balance off, but the officer didn't care. He dragged him toward the squad car like a captured animal. That's when Jamal saw them. Two bystanders, standing on the corner, phones raised. They were recording. For a brief second, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe this time, the truth won't die with me. cop noticed too. His grip on Jamal tightened, his jaw clenching. For a moment, Jamal thought he might stop, might rethink what he was doing now that the world was watching. But no. Instead, the cop shoved him harder, slamming him onto the hood of the squad car. Jamal gritted his teeth, biting back a groan of pain. The cuffs dug into his wrists, cutting into his skin. "Resisting arrest," the cop muttered under his breath. "You just never learn, do you?" Jamal sucked in a breath, his vision going red at the edges. "I didn't resist a damn thing." The officer's hand gripped his collar, pulling him close. His voice was low, almost amused. "Yeah?" A smirk curled at his lips. "Let's see what the report says." Jamal froze. There it was, the unspoken rule. The badge didn't need the truth. It only needed a story, and the officer had already written his. The ride to the precinct was long, silent, suffocating. Jamal sat in the back seat, hands still bound, jaw clenched so tight it ached. The city lights blurred outside the window, but all he could focus on was his own reflection, his own face, lined with exhaustion, frustration, rage. The squad car pulled into the station. The officer yanked him out roughly, leading him through the doors. Other cops barely looked up as he was dragged through processing, as though this was nothing new, because it wasn't. "Name?" the board desk officer asked, barely glancing up. Before Jamal could answer, his arresting officer spoke first. "Jamal Carter, suspect in an armed robbery." Jamal whipped his head around. "What?" His voice echoed through the station, but no one reacted. The officer smirked, patting his holster. "You're lucky, Carter. Some of my colleagues wouldn't have given you the chance to argue." Jamal's stomach turned. There it was, the quiet threat, the reminder that, on another night, with no cameras, this could have ended with him in a body bag instead of a holding cell. They processed him like a criminal, took his fingerprints, his mugshot, stripped him of his dignity piece by piece. And when he was finally thrown into a small, filthy cell, all he could do was sit on the cold bench, staring at the floor, wondering how the hell he was supposed to fight something this big. Because it wasn't just about this cop, it was about all of them, and the system that protected them. Meanwhile, outside the station, the video of his arrest had already gone viral, and the people weren't staying silent. Not this time. The air outside the precinct crackled with tension. What had started as a few onlookers filming Jamal's arrest had grown into a crowd. Dozens, then hundreds of people gathered, their voices rising in anger as the video spread across social media like wildfire. Inside his cell, Jamal sat stiffly on the bench, his muscles tense as he listened to the distant hum of voices outside. His mind raced, replaying every second of the arrest, every lie that had already been spoken into existence. Suspect in an armed robbery. That was the story now, not the truth, not the fact that he had been driving home from work, not that he had complied. None of that mattered. What mattered was what they could make people believe. And once they put that story out there, the world would start picking him apart. They'd dig up his past, that one fight in high school, the parking tickets he never paid, the time he got pulled over for a broken taillight, just like tonight. They'd find a way to make him look guilty, because that's what they always did. A loud clang echoed through the holding area as an officer banged on the bars. "On your feet, Carter." Jamal looked up, his heart pounding. "What now?" The officer smirked. "Looks like you got people making a fuss outside." Jamal stood slowly, eyes narrowing. "Good." The cop chuckled. "We'll see about that." He was led down a dimly lit hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. When they reached an interrogation room, they shoved him inside. Sitting at the metal table was a man in a suit, Detective Harris. Older, sharp-eyed, the type who had been in the game long enough to know how to bend the rules without breaking them. Jamal didn't sit. He crossed his arms. "Am I being charged?" Harris leaned back in his chair, studying him like a puzzle he was trying to solve. "That depends." Jamal clenched his jaw. "On what?" The detective folded his hands. "On how cooperative you are." Jamal let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Cooperative?" "I didn't do anything. That cop pulled me over for no reason, and now I'm locked up for something I had nothing to do with." Harris sighed like he had heard this all before. "Look, kid, you're in a tough spot. The officer says you resisted. We have reason to believe you might have been involved in a crime, and—" "That's bullshit." Jamal slammed his hands on the table. Harris didn't flinch. "Listen," the detective continued, voice calm. "You're lucky, real lucky. No one got hurt, no one died. But out there, people are making a lot of noise about this." Jamal sat slowly, his eyes never leaving Harris's. And the department wants this to go away, fast." Harris laced his fingers together. "So, I have a deal for you." Jamal scoffed. "A deal? What, you want me to confess to something I didn't do?" "Not exactly." Harris leaned forward. "We drop the robbery charge, wipe it from your record. In exchange, you admit you were resisting arrest. Say you got aggressive, that the officer had reason to use force." Jamal stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to lie?" Harris didn't deny it. "Think about it," the detective said. "You walk away with a minor charge, no jail time. We keep the streets from turning into a war zone. Everybody wins." Jamal felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He looked down at his cuffed hands, then back at Harris. This was how they did it. This was how they erased people like him. They wanted him to hand them the story they needed. A false confession. A clean justification for the cop who had violated his rights, humiliated him, slammed him against the car. And if he didn't, then they would take the story from him anyway. Jamal took a slow, deep breath. Go to hell. Harris sighed, standing up. Suit yourself. He knocked on the door. The guards came back, grabbed Jamal's arms, and started leading him away. You're making a mistake, Carter, Harris called after him. Once the news gets a hold of your real record, this crowd won't be on your side anymore. Jamal didn't respond, because he knew one thing. The truth was already out there. And no matter how much they tried to bury it, people weren't looking away this time. They were watching, and they were angry. Outside, the protests swelled. The city was standing up, and the system was running out of places to hide. The city was a powder keg, and Jamal Carter was the spark. By the time the sun rose, the crowd outside the police station had doubled, then tripled. Hundreds of voices demanded his release, their chants echoing through the streets. Let him go. Justice for Jamal. No more lies. The video of his arrest had spread like wildfire. It played on every news station, flooded every social media platform. People saw the truth, the unnecessary stop, the bogus charges, the violence used against a man who had done nothing wrong. But inside the station, they were still trying to bury him. Jamal sat in his holding cell, exhaustion weighing on him. His wrists throbbed where the cuffs had cut into his skin. His jaw ached from where his face had been slammed into the car. But more than anything, he felt the anger simmering deep in his gut. They wanted him to be afraid. They wanted him to break, but he wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Moments later, the door swung open, and his mother walked in. Denise Carter was not a woman who scared easily, but right now, she looked like she had been through hell. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Ma," Jamal breathed. She rushed to him, grabbing his face, scanning every inch of him like she needed to see for herself that he was still whole. "They said you resisted," she whispered, shaking her head. "I saw the video. You didn't do anything." Jamal swallowed hard, nodding. "I know." Denise turned to the officer behind her. "Why is my son still in here?" she demanded. The officer, one of the few black cops Jamal had seen in this precinct, shifted uncomfortably. "The department is still deciding on charges." "Charges?" Denise's voice rose. "For what?" The cop didn't answer. Denise took a step closer, voice lowering to a deadly whisper. "You tell whoever's in charge that if they don't let my son go now, they won't just have protests outside. They'll have lawsuits. They'll have national attention. They'll have a city on fire." Jamal had never seen an officer look so nervous. Without a word, the cop turned and left the room. Jamal exhaled. "Ma, you didn't have to..." Denise whipped around, her face hard. Don't you dare tell me to be quiet about this. They could have killed you, Jamal." Her voice broke on the last word, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Jamal saw the fear underneath her rage. This wasn't just about him. This was about every mother who had lost their son to the same system. Denise blinked quickly, pushing back her tears. She reached out and gripped his hand tight. "You're coming home today." Jamal wanted to believe that, but he knew better. Meanwhile, in a back office of the precinct, Darren Cole stood with his arms crossed, his jaw tight as he listened to the precinct captain lay it all out. "The protests are getting bigger. The mayor's calling for an investigation. We're taking heat from the media. We have to let Carter go." Cole's lip curled. "You're kidding me." The captain shook his head. "You messed up, Cole. The body cam's malfunctioning isn't a good enough excuse this time. There's video proof. If we don't cut him loose, this city's gonna explode." Cole clenched his fists. "So that's it? We just let him win?" The captain sighed, rubbing his temple. "This isn't about winning. It's about survival." He shot Cole a hard look. "I can't protect you from this one." Cole's face twisted, his skin going red with fury. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The system had always protected men like him before, so why the hell was it failing now? 30 minutes later, the cell door opened. Jamal stood, squaring his shoulders as the officer from earlier gave him a reluctant nod. "You're free to go." Jamal stepped forward, his mother at his side, but before he left, he turned back, locking eyes with the officers watching him. They wanted him to walk out of here grateful, silent. But Jamal Carter wasn't walking out as a victim. He was walking out as a man ready to burn their entire corrupt system to the ground. Outside, the crowd erupted as Jamal stepped onto the sidewalk. People cheered, some cried, others simply reached for him, as if touching him proved that he had made it out alive. His best friend, Malik, was the first to reach him, gripping his shoulders. "You good, man?" Jamal nodded. "Not even close." A reporter shoved a microphone in his face. "Jamal, how do you feel right now?" Jamal took a deep breath. Then he looked directly into the camera. "I feel like it's time to make sure this never happens again." The battle wasn't over. But this time, the badge wouldn't win. This time, the truth was louder, and the whole damn world was listening. The end